Todd from New Zealand is P1 on mediums. Dave B Racing is 4th. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is 3rd on mediums. That Canadian guy is 1st. Best lap is a 1:46.166. Dave B Racing from South Africa is 4th. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P3. Todd is 2nd. Dave B Racing is P4. Todd is 2nd. Johnny Prince is 3rd. Dave B Racing is 2nd. Best lap is a 1:46.389. Todd is 3rd. The qualification session is at Dubai GP in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Todd from New Zealand is P19 on mediums. Jason Short is 1st on softs. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is 6th on mediums. Todd is P7. Johnny Prince is 5th. Jason Short is 6th. The race dictator from New Zealand is P1 on mediums. The race dictator improved is first with a 146.707. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P3 on mediums. Jason Short is P3. The race dictator from New Zealand is second up 0.11. Five minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator is provisional pole with a 145.952. Johnny Prince is P6 up 12.62. Chris Butt from New Zealand is P5 on mediums. Johnny Prince is P4 up 0.32. Todd is 6th up 0.11. Johnny Prince is 4th up 0.13. Johnny Prince improved his P3 with a 146.794. 0.842 off pole. Jason Short is P7 up 2.32 on softs. Jason Short improved his P6 with a 151.285. 5.333 off pole. The race dictator is first up 0.15. The race dictator is provisional pole with a 145.266. Jason Short is P6 up 1.10. Jason Short improved his P5 with a 149.975. 4.709 off pole. Todd is 7th up 0.28. Best lap is a 152.166. 6.900 off pole. The qualifying session is now in overtime. The race dictator is first up 0.15. That Canadian guy from Canada is P2 up 0.27 on mediums. Best lap is a 146.513. 1.247 off pole. The race dictator is P1 up 0.14 on mediums. The race dictator is provisional pole with a 145.096. Dave B Racing is fourth up 0.21. That Canadian guy is second up 1.06. That Canadian guy is provisional pole with a 145.063. Jason Short is sixth on mediums. Best lap is a 149.975. 4.912 off pole. Johnny Prince is P3. Best lap is a 146.794. 1.731 off pole. Broadcast bot is 19th. The race session is at Dubai GP in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. That Canadian guy is first. The race dictator from New Zealand is P2 on mediums. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P3 on mediums. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Johnny Prince lost third to Dave B Racing. The race dictator is P2. The race dictator passed that Canadian guy for P1. That Canadian guy from Canada is P2 on mediums. Dave B Racing from South Africa is third on mediums. That Canadian guy is P2. Dave B Racing is P3. That Canadian guy is second. Johnny Prince is third. Chris Butt from New Zealand is P4 on mediums, 0.6 behind Johnny Prince. Johnny Prince is P3, 0.4 ahead of Chris Butt. Chris Butt is fourth, 0.7 behind Johnny Prince. Chris Budd passed Johnny Prince for P3. That Canadian guy is fifth for P2P left, 0.5 behind Johnny Prince. That Canadian guy passed Johnny Prince for P4. Chris Budd is P3, 0.6 behind Dave B Racing. That Canadian guy is fourth on mediums, 0.7 behind Chris Budd. Chris Budd is P3, 0.4 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy ahead is on P2P. Chris Budd lost third to that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is third, 3 P2P left, 0.4 ahead of Chris Budd. Chris Budd from New Zealand is P4, 1.5 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is third, 0.7 behind Dave B Racing. That Canadian guy is on P2P. Chris Budd is fourth, 6 P2P left, 1.7 behind that Canadian guy. "15 minutes remaining in the session. Chris Budd lost P4 to Johnny Prince. Dave B Racing is P2, 1.7 behind the race dictator. Wiremu is 7th on mediums, 0.9 behind Todd. Dave B Racing is 2nd, 0.8 behind the race dictator. Todd from New Zealand is P6 on mediums, 1.0 behind that Canadian guy. Dave B Racing is 2nd. Best lap is a 1:49.970. 3.500 off the fastest lap. That Canadian guy from Canada is P3, 2 P2P left, 0.7 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is 2nd, 0.6 ahead of that Canadian guy. Johnny Prince is P4, 0.8 behind Chris Budd. Johnny Prince is now 4th. Dave B Racing is P2, 0.5 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy is 3rd, 0.5 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is P2, 0.3 behind the race dictator. guy behind is on P2P. That Canadian guy from Canada is third 1P2P left, 0.2 behind Dave B Racing. That Canadian guy passed Dave B Racing for P2. Johnny Prince exiting pits on mediums. Dave B Racing is P3, 0.2 behind that Canadian guy. Dave B Racing lost fourth to Chris Butt. That Canadian guy is P2. Best lap is a 1:46.470. Jason Short entering the pits is P8. Wiremu on lap 4 is P3 7P2P left, 1.9 behind that Canadian guy. Wiremu was 30.1 faster last lap. That Canadian guy is P2 0P2P left, 0.8 behind the race dictator. Chris Butt on lap 5 is 4th 5P2P left, 1.9 behind Wiremu. Jason Short exiting pits on mediums. That Canadian guy on lap 5 is P2, 0.8 behind the race dictator. Ten minutes remaining in the session. Chris Butt is P4 4P2P left, 1.1 behind Wiremu. That Canadian guy on lap 5 is 4th, 1.0 behind Chris Butt. That Canadian guy was 4.0 faster last lap. That Canadian guy passed Chris Butt for P3. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P4, 0.2 behind that Canadian guy. Dave B Racing is now 4th. Wiremu on lap 5 is 2nd, 0.4 ahead of that Canadian guy. Chris Butt is P3, 0.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. Chris Butt was 5.4 faster last lap. Wiremu on lap 6 is 2nd, 0.4 behind the race dictator. Chris Butt is P3, 0.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. Wiremu is P2, 0.3 behind the race dictator. Wiremu was 3.0 faster last lap. Chris Butt is P3, 0.5 ahead of that Canadian guy. Wiremu is 2nd, 0.4 ahead of Chris Butt. Chris Butt from New Zealand is P3, 0.2 behind Wiremu. The race dictator ahead is on P2P. Chris Butt is on P2P. Chris Budd passed Wiremu for second. Wiremu on lap 6 is P3, 0.3 ahead of Dave B Racing. Wiremu passed the race dictator for P1. The race dictator from New Zealand is P3 for P2 P left, 0.2 ahead of Dave B Racing. Todd is P4, 0.6 behind the race dictator. The race dictator is third. Best lap is a 146.537. 0.067 off the fastest lap. The race dictator is on P2P. Chris Budd is P5 to P2P left, 1.8 behind Todd. Todd was 6.5 faster last lap. That Canadian guy is second, 0.5 ahead of the race dictator. That Canadian guy was 1.9 faster last lap. The race dictator is third, 3 P2P left, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is on P2P. Wiremu is P2 6 P2P left, 0.2 behind that Canadian guy. Wiremu passed that Canadian guy for first. 5 minutes remaining in the session. That Canadian guy is P2. Wiremu behind is on P2P. The race dictator is third. The race dictator is now P6. That Canadian guy on lap 7 is P2, 0.3 behind Wiremu. Wiremu was 0.6 faster last lap. Wiremu ahead is on P2P. That Canadian guy passed Wiremu for first. Chris Budd on lap 8 is P3 0 P2P left, 0.4 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing was 2.0 faster last lap. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P4 3 P2P left, 0.3 behind Chris Budd. Chris Budd is P3 on mediums, 0.3 behind Wiremu. Dave B Racing is P7, 1.0 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing passed the race dictator for P6. Chris Budd on lap 8 is P3, 0.4 behind Wiremu. Wiremu ahead is on P2P. The race dictator is P7 to P2P left, 0.5 behind Dave B Racing. The race dictator passed Dave B Racing for 6th. That Canadian guy is P2, 0.6 behind Wiremu. Wiremu ahead is on P2P. Chris Budd is 3rd, 1.0 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is P2, 0.6 behind Wiremew. Chris Butt on lap 9 is P3, 0.8 behind that Canadian guy. Chris Butt was 5.7 faster last lap. Wiremew is second, 1P2P left, 0.1 behind that Canadian guy. Wiremew was 1.1 faster last lap. Wiremew is now P1. Jason Short entering the pits is 8th. Dave B Racing is P6, 1P2P left, 0.3 behind the race dictator. Todd is P7, 4P2P left, 1.0 behind Dave B Racing. Todd is on P2P. Dave B Racing is 6th, 0.8 behind the race dictator. The race dictator was 3.0 faster last lap. The race dictator entering the pits is P7. Dave B Racing is now P5. The race dictator is 7th. Todd is P6 on mediums, 2P2P left, 1.7 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing was 8.6 faster last lap. Johnny Prince is third, 2P2P left, 2.2 behind Chris Butt. Todd from New Zealand is P6, 1P2P left, 2.2 behind Dave B Racing. Wiremew is P1. Best lap is a 1:48.697. 2.227 off the fastest lap. Wiremew is on P2P. The leader has just finished the race. Wiremew finished first. Johnny Prince finished P2. That Canadian guy finished P3. Chris Butt finished P4. Dave B Racing is on P2P. Dave B Racing finished 5th. Todd finished 6th. The race dictator finished 7th. Broadcast bot is 9th. The race session is at Dubai GP in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. The race dictator from New Zealand is second on mediums. Todd from New Zealand is second on mediums. Dave B Racing from South Africa is third on mediums. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Dave B Racing is now second. Wiremu is P3 on mediums. Wiremu lost fourth to Johnny Prince. Dave B Racing is second. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is fourth on mediums. Dave B Racing is second. Johnny Prince is fourth. Dave B Racing is second. Dave B Racing is now first. Johnny Prince is third. Johnny Prince is on P2P. Johnny Prince passed Chris Butt for P2. Chris Butt from New Zealand is P5 on mediums. Chris Butt is on P2P. Todd is 7th, 1.8 behind Wiremu. The race dictator is P4, 2.0 behind that Canadian guy. Chris Butt is P5, 0.7 behind the race dictator. Wiremu is 6th. Best lap is a 2:10.616. 16.697 off the fastest lap. Chris Butt from New Zealand is P5, 0.9 ahead of Wiremew. Wiremew ahead is on P2P. Wiremew is 6th 5 P2P left, 0.8 behind Chris Butt. That Canadian guy from Canada is P3 on mediums, 3.1 behind Johnny Prince. That Canadian guy is on P2P. Wiremew on lap 3 is P6, 0.7 behind Chris Butt. Wiremew passed Chris Butt for P5. Chris Butt is P6, 0.5 behind Wiremew. 15 minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator is P4, 4.1 ahead of Wiremew. That Canadian guy is P3 on mediums, 3 P2P left, 0.8 behind Johnny Prince. That Canadian guy is on P2P. Chris Butt is 7th, 0.7 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is 3rd. Best lap is a 1:45.455. Chris Butt on lap 4 is 7th, 0.8 behind Todd. Todd was 9.8 faster last lap. That Canadian guy is P3 2 P2P left, 0.3 behind Johnny Prince. That Canadian guy was 3.5 faster last lap. Johnny Prince on lap 4 is 3rd 5 P2P left, 0.2 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator from New Zealand is 4th, 1.0 behind Johnny Prince. Johnny Prince is 3rd. Best lap is a 1:48.799. 3.344 off the fastest lap. The race dictator is P4, 0.6 ahead of Wiremew. Johnny Prince is P3, 0.5 ahead of the race dictator. Wiremew is P5. Best lap is a 1:47.528. 2.073 off the fastest lap. Chris Butt is 7th, 0.7 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is 2nd on mediums, 0.5 behind Dave B Racing. race dictator from New Zealand is 4th, 0.6 ahead of Wiremew. Wiremew was 5.5 faster last lap. That Canadian guy is 2nd, 0.6 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing was 1.0 faster last lap. Johnny Prince on lap 5 is 3rd, 0.7 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy behind is on P2P. Johnny Prince is now 1st. Johnny Prince is on P2P. Johnny Prince lost P1 to that Canadian guy. Wiremew is 4th. That Canadian guy is P2 1 P2P left, 0.3 behind Johnny Prince. Wiremew is P4 4 P2P left, 0.5 behind the race dictator. 10 minutes remaining in the session. That Canadian guy is P2, 0.4 behind Johnny Prince. That Canadian guy is on P2P. Johnny Prince is P2 4 P2P left battling that Canadian guy. The race dictator is P3 4 P2P left, 0.7 behind Johnny Prince. Johnny Prince is P2, 0.4 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator behind is on P2P. Johnny Prince is on P2P. The race dictator is P3 3 P2P left, 0.7 behind Johnny Prince. Dave B Racing on lap 6 is 7th battling Todd. Dave B Racing passed Todd for 6th. Johnny Prince is P2 3 P2P left, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. Wiremew is 4th, 0.6 behind the race dictator. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is 2nd, 0.5 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is 3rd, 0.2 ahead of Wiremew. Chris Budd behind is on P2P. The race dictator is on P2P. Wiremew behind is on P2P. The race dictator lost P3 to Wiremew. Johnny Prince is P2. Wiremew is 3rd. Chris Budd on lap 7 is P5 2 P2P left, 0.4 behind the race dictator. The race dictator ahead is on P2P. Wiremew is P3 3 P2P left, 0.3 behind Johnny Prince. Wiremu is now 5th. Chris Butt is P5 on mediums, 0.8 behind Todd. Dave B Racing is P3 for P2P left, 1.0 behind the race dictator. Dave B Racing is on P2P. Wiremu on lap 7 is P6, 1.0 behind Todd. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P3 P2P left, 0.9 behind the race dictator. Johnny Prince entering the pits is P7. 5 minutes remaining in the session. Todd is P6 P2P left, 0.7 behind Wiremu. Dave B Racing is 3rd, 1.0 behind the race dictator. The race dictator is P2 on mediums, 1 P2P left, 1.2 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is P3, 1.0 behind the race dictator. Wiremu is 6th, 2.6 behind Todd. Wiremu is on P2P. Dave B Racing is P3, 2.1 behind the race dictator. Wiremu is P6. Todd is 6th, 0.2 behind Wiremu. Chris Butt from New Zealand is 6th, 1 P2P left, 0.9 behind Todd. Todd was 0.9 faster last lap. Todd ahead is on P2P. Chris Butt is on P2P. Dave B Racing on lap 9 is P3 2 P2P left, 2.5 behind the race dictator. The race dictator was 0.8 faster last lap. Chris Butt is 6th. Best lap is a 150.668. 5.213 off the fastest lap. Todd ahead is on P2P. Todd is P5 on mediums, 0 P2P left, 0.2 ahead of Chris Butt. Todd lost P5 to Chris Butt. Dave B Racing is P2 1 P2P left, 1.8 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is third on mediums 0p2p left, 1.9 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is second, 1.0 behind the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator was 1.1 faster last lap. That Canadian guy is third. Dave B Racing is second. Best lap is a 146.282. 1.109 off the fastest lap. Dave B Racing is on P2P. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P70 P2P left. Dave B Racing is second. Chris Butt is P50 P2P left. Dave B Racing is second on mediums 0 P2P left, 0.7 behind the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator is first 0 P2P left, 0.9 ahead of Dave B Racing. The leader has just finished the race. The Race Dictator finished first. Dave B Racing finished second. That Canadian guy is third. That Canadian guy finished P3. Wiremew finished fourth. Chris Butt finished P5. Todd is P6. Todd finished P6. Johnny Prince finished 7th. Broadcast bot is P8.